Hello all, and welcome to tonight's beer review. Tonight's going to be a very special beer review, and there's going to be some very special beer reviews on the following Saturdays as well, and if I'm lucky, maybe even another Saturday. I'm thinking of trying to pick up a bottle of barrel-aged Bigfoot. I spent $29 on beers today because, what the hell, man? I'm just kind of living it up for now because lean days are coming in a few months. And I didn't just want to go and prolong my misery, so I'm going to drink expensive beer and good whiskey and give myself the pleasure now for tomorrow I diet. So, what beer do I have tonight for your review? Well, this is Altbitter. It's one that rather defines categorization. An imperial blend of German-style Altbier and English-style bitter ale aged in rye whiskey barrels. It's a barrel-aged beer. Now, this is a 30th anniversary collaboration. There's 6, I suppose, between Widmer Brothers Brewing and Deschutes Brewery, which are both Oregon breweries. Widmer Brothers kind of gets crapped on because they're partially owned by Anheuser-Busch. I don't care. As long as a brewery makes good beer, I don't care if they're owned by Satan himself. So, let's read the description, shall we? Altbitter is a blend of 2 classic favorites from 2 pioneering Oregon breweries. Deschutes Brewery's Bachelor Bitter and Widmer Brother Brewing's Altbier. Imperial versions of both beers were blended together, then 50% was aged in rye whiskey barrels before blending it back together to create Altbitter. The finished beer is a bold homage to the brewery's respective German and English influences, done in a uniquely Oregon way. Now, English-style bitters, alt beers, they're usually light session beers. You don't usually think of them at imperial strength. You don't usually think of them being barrel-aged. Yet here we are. Now this is fairly heavy. 9.5 ABV. So I'm probably going to be a little bit tore up by the end of this. So right now it's a little bit too cold. I was kind of torn by this because alt beer you kind of want served at a colder temperature. Bitter's not so much cold, but still colder than anything that you would have in any barrel aged beer. I'm going to be pouring this into a stout glass because I want to go and inhale that wonderful smell past my post-nasal drip. I'm your most socially awkward beer reviewer on YouTube. So, that's saying a lot, That is really saying a lot. So, let's have at it, shall we? Huh. Definitely gives off a much more immediate German smell. Giving it a fairly vigorous pour. So I want some of head here. Usually thicker beers don't give off too much head. Say it's a dark amber brown. Semi-translucent. Well, translucent. With a thin yellow head. Very much thick. Very much, even though this is a blend, you can kind of smell that the yeast used was very German, and the German smells are predominating over the bitter ones here. We smell the tang from the rye. We smell breadiness. Well, I smell breadiness anyway. Brown breadiness that's very reminiscent of a Doppelbock, but a bit on the sweeter side. There's a hint of booziness to it. And something like preserved fruits as well. Honestly, there's a kind of a hint of what I kind of a sort of funkiness that kind of I find somewhat reminiscent of sake. But all in all, I would say pretty much Altbier dominates the nose there. You know, as that top note, and all the others are kind of underneath that. Very thick mouthfeel. Very chewy. The finish has this interesting sort of combination between the woodiness of barrel aging and sort of bitterness of English hops. It's a very mild bitterness, though. It's less bitter than I would expect even a regular English bitter to be. Underneath that finish is a delightful sweetness. Candied fruits and treacle. Front is very bready. It has that English bitter mouthfeel. There's a slight butteriness to it, so you can probably imagine it as sort of sweet brown bread with kind of a nice little butter on it. Again, it reminds me a bit more of a Doppelbock than anything really Altbier. Probably because of the strength and concentration of the beer itself. But there are interesting notes that come from the English bitter. That sort of bitter finish. It's slight, but is not like a lager or, well, Altbier is technically an ale, but it has a similar finish to a lager in that, you know, there's not that sort of bitter hop feel to it. This has a bitter hop feel. The buttery mouth feel. There's a kind of raisiny quality to the mid palate. There is sweetness there, but it's balanced by the bitterness, so it's not cloying at all. This is probably relatively well hopped, considering the thickness of the body. There's probably, you know, that means there's a heavy malt presence there, and obviously somewhat of a sweet malt presence. So they've done very well in creating a very well balanced beer. As it warms, I'm finding more of that rye barrel aging kind of coming up more towards the finish. You get that nice citrus tang of rye, and of course that barrel aging, that sort of oaken taste to it. There's a nice toasty, caramelized smelling as it warms up. It's warming up pretty significantly because I only poured a small bit into this glass and I'm holding it pretty closely. There is a caramelized kind of toasty smell coming from it. There's kind of a cross in between, you know, caramelizing sugar and toasting bread. Sweetness is starting to broaden, but still very well balanced by that bitteriness. There's a lot of very interesting things going on with this beer. I have to say I am quite enjoying it. The barrel aging doesn't show up too much, but that's okay. What there is, it's there, but what's really predominant there is still interesting. It's still very good. And honestly, if you gave this to me and said, what kind of beer is this? I would be absolutely baffled and guess some sort of variation of a Doppelbock, you know, because it's really not really hitting alt beer notes. It's really not hitting bitter notes. It's, that said, it's still much lighter in coloration than a Doppelbock, so I would just be absolutely baffled. I would guess some sort of heavy black German beer. Excuse me? With English hopping. Definitely English hop. Those hops really make themselves distinctively known as English and not German. Malts are definitely German, though. So, I am going to sit and slowly enjoy this beer over the rest of tonight. So what can we say about this Altbitter? Very interesting. Rye barrel aged, but rye barrel aging doesn't really show up in it too much. It's there, but the real notes, the real interest kind of comes to the malts for me and the mouthfeel and kind of how it kind of plays with the hops and, you know, that interesting twist on the hopping. Should you get this if you can find it? Almost certainly. This was under $8 for this bomber here. Where are you going to find a barrel-aged beer for under $8? I have no idea. This is like the cheapest one I've ever found. And what do you know? It's a pretty damn good one. So if you want to go and try a barrel-aged beer and you don't want to break the bank on buying a bomber for about $15 to $20, which is what I've seen most barrel-aged beers being priced at, definitely give this one a shot. See if it's your cup of tea. And move on from there. So, Altbitter, between Deschutes and Widmer, give it a shot. That's your beer review for tonight, folks. Cheers.